I've lived in this modern suburban paradise for a few years now, and let me tell you, nothing screams community spirit like having your cable and internet service secretly share itself with the whole block. Yeah, you read that right. I'm a pretty tech-savvy resident who prides myself on staying connected, both online and with my neighbors. So imagine my shock when I found out that the cable line running through our building wasn't just servicing my apartment, but, oh no, was actually the lifeline for the entire neighborhood. Our community is the sort that boasts about its state-of-the-art amenities, complete with a meticulously maintained pool, pristine fitness center, and, of course, the ultra-modern cable and internet system that everyone assumes is solely for their personal use. The kicker? This cable system was installed ages ago without anyone's knowledge that a critical line was actually linking every single unit on the block. It's like buying the deluxe model of a car, only to later discover that the engine you thought was just for show is actually powering an entire parade. Enter Karen. And no, I'm not exaggerating when I say she is the quintessential HOA enforcer. Picture this. A woman in her early 50s, armed with a clipboard, a rules are rules attitude, and an unwavering belief that she knows what's best for all of us. Karen's been running the HOA with an iron fist ever since she got her shiny new title, and honestly, it sometimes feels like she's more interested in enforcing her own version of perfection than actually understanding how things work. So, when she started receiving a few scattered complaints about residents misusing the cable service, because apparently streaming too many cat videos is now a punishable offense, she jumped to action faster than you can say entitled. Now, let me set the stage. I was lounging in my apartment one sunny afternoon, enjoying a marathon of my favorite shows, when I started noticing weird fluctuations in the signal. At first, I chalked it up to my own modem acting up because, hey, technology never works perfectly, right? But as the minutes ticked by and my internet became more and more unreliable, I couldn't help but wonder if something was amiss in our usually seamless digital utopia. Little did I know, Karen had already decided to fix the problem in the most Karen way imaginable, by cutting the cable. I mean, come on. How do you go from a few complaints about excessive usage to thinking that the solution is to pull the plug on an essential service for the entire block? It's as if Karen looked at our thriving, interconnected community and thought, you know what would make these people appreciate technology more? A little enforced downtime. In her mind, by severing the cable connection, she'd somehow instill discipline and get everyone back in line with the community's strict standards. And here I am, caught in the middle of this orchestrated chaos, wondering if any of us ever really read the fine print in our HOA welcome packet. Let's talk about the community for a minute. Most of us are regular folks who move here for the promise of a friendly, connected neighborhood. We share weekend barbecues, swap stories over coffee, and occasionally commiserate about the latest quirky rules that the HOA, yes, led by Karen, decides to enforce. I, for one, have always believed that being connected isn't just about having fast internet. It's about fostering relationships and keeping the channels of communication open. So when our internet went dark, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a slap in the face to every resident who values a free and open community. I wasn't the only one to notice the sudden blackout. Soon enough, fellow neighbors began posting on our community forum, and trust me, the thread exploded with memes and angry rants. About the inexplicable outage, people started sharing their horror stories. Imagine being in the middle of an important Zoom call or trying to stream the finale of your favorite series, only to have your connection vanish without a trace. The collective frustration was palpable, and soon enough, the forum became a battleground of opinions. Some were pleading for a resolution, while others were doubling down on their outrage towards Karen. Now, I'm not one to jump on the Karen bandwagon, pun absolutely intended. But when you have someone in a position of authority who seems blissfully unaware of the intricacies of the system they're managing, it's hard not to roll your eyes. I mean, how hard is it to verify that the cable line you're about to cut isn't the digital artery keeping an entire block alive? It wasn't an act of malice, at least not intentionally, but it was a textbook case of entitlement meeting ignorance. Karen's well-meaning attempt to correct what she perceived as a violation of the rules ended up throwing our community into a full-blown digital dark age. Reflecting on that day now, I can't help but marvel at the sheer absurdity of the situation. Here we were, living in what was marketed as a high-tech, community-driven environment, And yet, a single, ill-considered decision by our self-appointed guardian of order brought everything crashing down. It's almost poetic, if you have a twisted sense of humor about these things, in that our reliance on technology, which we often take for granted, can be so easily disrupted by someone who thinks they're doing us a favor by enforcing arbitrary rules. In the midst of all this, I started thinking about how we ended up in this predicament. Our cable and internet system was installed with the best intentions, designed to provide each unit with reliable service. But somewhere along the line, someone somewhere made a mistake. A simple miscommunication or an overlooked detail meant that one crucial cable was not just a connection for one apartment, but the nerve center for our entire network. And yet, not a single person in our community, not even the tech experts among us, knew about it until it was too late. There's something profoundly frustrating about the way our modern society operates, where technology is supposed to unite us, yet it also makes us incredibly vulnerable to the whims of a few self-appointed gatekeepers. It's almost as if, by trying to create a harmonious, interconnected community, we've inadvertently set ourselves up for disaster. And Karen, in her quest for order, ended up highlighting just how brittle that system can be. One moment, everything is working perfectly, and the next, a single decision cascades into a collective crisis that affects every single resident. I remember scrolling through the community forum later that day, reading post after post from fellow neighbors who were both angry and bewildered. One post, in particular, stood out, a detailed rant about how Karen's actions were a perfect example of how entitled people think they know best, without any understanding of the bigger picture. It was both hilarious and infuriating to see how many people were blaming not just Karen, but the entire concept of an overly controlling HOA system. In a way, it was a wake-up call for all of us. We had become so dependent on technology and so trusting of the systems that manage it that we never bothered to question the infrastructure behind it. As I sat there, laptop open and frustration mounting, I couldn't help but feel a tinge of sympathy for Karen. Sure, her actions were misguided, and her approach was as rigid as they come, but it also seemed like she was trapped in a world of endless rules and regulations, with no room for common sense or genuine human connection. It's a classic case of authority gone awry, when those in charge lose sight of the fact that their decisions impact real people's lives, not just a set of abstract guidelines. By the end of that tumultuous day, our community was left in disarray, both literally with no internet and figuratively, as we grappled with the realization that the very backbone of our modern lifestyle could be so easily disrupted. It set the stage for a confrontation between the everyday resident, like me, and the faceless bureaucracy represented by Karen and the HOA. And while I wasn't sure what the immediate future held, one thing was crystal clear. Things were about to get a whole lot more interesting. Looking back, it's hard not to laugh at the sheer absurdity of it all. Here we were, a bunch of tech-dependent individuals living in a so-called modern community, completely blindsided by the actions of one overly entitled individual. It's a reminder that sometimes, in our quest for a perfect, well-managed community, we forget to account for the human element, the quirks, the mistakes, and yes, the entitlement that can turn a routine day into a full-blown neighborhood crisis. So, to all my fellow residents still reeling from that infamous day, let's take a moment to appreciate the irony. In a world where technology is supposed to make life easier, it's the people, and their stubborn refusal to embrace flexibility, that often end up complicating everything. And as for Karen, well, let's just say her solution to our connectivity problems was the spark that ignited a revolution of shared frustration and, eventually, a call for a better, more transparent system of community management. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was deep into my work-from-home routine, headphones on and coffee at hand, when I got a notification on our community app. At first, I assumed it was just another mundane update or maybe even a reminder about the upcoming HOA meeting. But then came the dreaded message, cable service disruption, maintenance in progress. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if it was a routine technical glitch or scheduled maintenance, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. Before I knew it, a series of frantic messages flooded the group chat and community forum. Internet's down for the whole block. I can't join my Zoom call. How are we supposed to do online classes now? The message was clear. Something was very, very wrong. Turns out, our beloved HOA's self-appointed enforcer Karen, had decided that our cable and internet system needed a correction. Apparently, after receiving a handful of complaints, mostly from those who were apparently offended by the sheer volume of streaming traffic or maybe just enjoying a good opportunity to assert her authority, Karen made a snap decision. Without a shred of due diligence, she pulled the proverbial plug and ordered the cable to be cut. In her mind, this was going to be a quick fix, a neat way to rein in what she saw as rampant misuse. But what she failed to realize was that the cable she so nonchalantly severed wasn't just feeding my apartment or even one building. It was the lifeline for our entire block. I remember sitting there, staring at my blank screen, feeling both incredulous and mildly amused. How does one even get to the point of thinking, I'm the arbiter of all things digital in this community? Karen's decision was the epitome of overreach. It wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about imposing her own brand of order on a system she barely understood. I couldn't help but laugh and then groan at the absurdity of it all. We had spent years basking in the glow of high-speed internet, only to have it snatched away by someone who apparently believed that cutting off connectivity would somehow reset our collective digital behavior. As the minutes ticked by, the full scope of the catastrophe became painfully evident. Entire families were thrown into chaos. Parents trying to conduct remote work meetings, kids struggling with online classes, and even seniors attempting to video call their loved ones, all suddenly found themselves plunged into a digital blackout. The modern conveniences that we had come to rely on were now mere memories of a hyper-connected past. In my apartment, I could hear the muffled sounds of neighbors venting their frustrations through their walls, the clatter of keyboards abruptly silenced, and the rising chorus of exasperated voices. Our community, once a shining beacon of connectivity and collaboration, had quickly devolved into a war zone of miscommunication and mounting panic. Meanwhile, the community forum exploded into activity. It was like watching a live feed of a digital revolution. Posts ranged from sarcastic memes mocking Karen's heroic efforts to impassioned rants about how an entire block should never be subjected to such arbitrary decisions again. One post, in particular, caught my attention. So apparently Karen thinks we're all incapable of managing our own internet? Newsflash. If you can't see that cutting off a single cable will bring down the whole system, maybe you're not as tech-savvy as you claim. And I couldn't agree more. Fueled by a mix of irritation and curiosity, I decided to get to the bottom of this mess. I wasn't about to let Karen's rash decision slide without understanding how it all happened. I began digging through our community's old infrastructure plans and tech manuals, trying to piece together the puzzle. What I discovered was a series of miscommunications, oversights, and a general lack of transparency regarding our cable system's design. It turned out that when the system was installed, no one had ever really explained its complexity. The cable that Karen so carelessly cut wasn't just a line of fiber. It was the main artery feeding internet connectivity to every single resident in our block. Armed with this knowledge, I couldn't help but feel a surge of indignation. Here we were, a community of tech-dependent individuals who prided ourselves on our seamless integration with modern technology. And yet we were at the mercy of one person's uninformed decision-making. How could someone in charge of managing our community's critical infrastructure not know the difference between a minor service tweak and a catastrophic shutdown? As I began reaching out to other residents for their perspectives, the sense of collective betrayal grew stronger. Several tech-savvy neighbors, who had once been quietly working behind the scenes to optimize our network, came forward with similar stories. They too had never been briefed on the delicate nature of our setup. It wasn't just a matter of cutting off the internet. It was a fundamental failure of communication between the HOA and its residents. The system had been designed to be robust, yet no one had ever taken the time to properly educate those in charge about its vulnerabilities. The community forum discussions quickly shifted from blame shifting to planning actionable steps. Threads emerged where residents exchanged tips on alternative connectivity options, mobile hotspots, neighborly Wi-Fi sharing, and even old-fashioned dial-up connections. There was a palpable sense of frustration, but also a spark of determination. We weren't going to sit idly by while our digital lives were dismantled by bureaucratic incompetence. Karen, for her part, remained oblivious to the storm she had unleashed. Instead of engaging with residents or addressing our concerns, she doubled down on her justification. In a series of official communications, she insisted that the cable cut was a necessary measure to curb excessive usage and to enforce community guidelines. These messages were peppered with passive-aggressive language that suggested our internet addiction was the root of all our problems. It was a classic case of trying to fix a problem that she didn't even understand, with a solution that only made things worse. The real kicker was when she scheduled an impromptu community meeting to discuss the supposed benefits of her decision. Picture a room full of irate residents, each with a story of missed deadlines, disrupted classes, or canceled virtual appointments, while Karen stood at the front, armed with PowerPoint slides and a misplaced sense of authority. The meeting quickly devolved into chaos. Neighbors shouted over her explanations, demanding answers and accountability. It was the kind of scene you'd expect from a poorly scripted reality TV show, except it was happening in our very own community center. At one point, I remember someone sarcastically asking, "Karen, did you think cutting the cable would magically reduce our screen time or something?" The room erupted in laughter, but the underlying message was clear. Karen had not only disrupted our connectivity, but had also shattered the trust we had placed in our HOA management. In the days that followed, the fallout was immediate and widespread. Essential services were disrupted. Doctors had to reschedule telemedicine appointments, remote workers missed important deadlines, and online classes were abruptly halted. Social gatherings planned online were canceled, leaving many feeling isolated and helpless in a time when digital communication was our lifeline. The incident forced us all to re-examine the way we managed our community's infrastructure. For years, we had taken for granted that the systems in place were infallible, that there was always someone who knew what they were doing. Karen's impulsive decision had revealed a glaring flaw in that assumption. It wasn't just a technical error. It was a systemic issue that called for greater transparency, better communication, and a more inclusive decision-making process. I began documenting the incident, gathering screenshots of furious posts, copies of Karen's official emails, and even audio recordings from the chaotic community meeting. My goal was simple: to create an undeniable record of how one misguided action could ripple through an entire community, causing chaos and disarray. I shared my findings on our community forum, urging everyone to demand better oversight and more technical competence from our HOA board. The response was overwhelming. Neighbors from every corner of the block rallied together, determined to ensure that no one else would suffer from such a preventable catastrophe. In retrospect, Karen's fateful decision was a wake-up call, a glaring reminder that even in a modern, tech-driven community, human error and misplaced authority can lead to spectacular failures. The cable cut was not just a blip in our daily routines. It was a symbol of the broader disconnect between those in power and the real needs of the people they were supposed to serve. As the days turned into a week, and the community slowly regained its connection, thanks to the combined efforts of a few tech-savvy residents and external service providers, the incident remained a hot topic of conversation. It sparked debates about the proper role of the HOA, the need for transparency in community management, and the importance of educating those in charge about the systems they oversee. For many of us, it was a humbling lesson in the fragility of our modern conveniences and a reminder that sometimes, even the simplest decisions can have far-reaching consequences. So here we are, a community still reeling from the digital blackout, but also more united than ever in our resolve to demand accountability. Karen's decision, while initially seen as an overreach of authority, inadvertently brought us closer together, forcing us to question the status quo and to stand up for the basic right to remain connected. And if there's one thing this experience has taught us, it's that in the age of technology, no system is truly infallible, and no one, not even a self-appointed guardian of order, has the right to pull the plug without considering the consequences. I couldn't just sit back and let Karen's catastrophic decision go unanswered. So, I teamed up with a group of equally pissed off and tech-savvy neighbors. Let's call ourselves the Digital Detectives. We huddled in my living room with a motley crew of laptops, routers, and enough cables to start our own DIY cable company, and began piecing together what had actually gone down. Armed with old infrastructure manuals, service records, and some insider tips from a retired technician who used to work on our network, we quickly discovered that something wasn't adding up. Every single technical document pointed to one glaring oversight. The cable that Karen so hastily cut wasn't just the lifeline for one building. It was the main artery feeding internet to the entire block. It was like discovering that the secret ingredient in your grandma's famous stew was actually the same spice you've been using to season your own dinner party. Our collective aha moment came when we cross-referenced the blueprints with the service logs. There it was in black and white. The cable line was the backbone for every resident's connectivity. And Karen? Well, she apparently hadn't bothered to read the fine print. Once we gathered enough evidence, the next step was unavoidable. Confronting the HOA and, of course, Karen. The community forum, already buzzing with outrage, became our rallying cry. Posts poured in from every corner of the block, each one a mix of humor, disbelief, and a burning desire for accountability. One thread was titled, "Karen, do you even tech?" And another simply read, "Cable Catastrophe, the Untold Story." At the next HOA meeting, which, let me tell you, was packed tighter than a can of sardines, we marched in, armed with our evidence and a burning need to expose the truth. The room was filled with a mix of frustrated residents, disillusioned parents, and even a few former tech professionals who were practically shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen took the stage like a queen defending her kingdom, clipboard clutched tightly in hand, a forced smile plastered on her face. But the moment she started speaking, it was clear that her words were nothing more than hollow justifications. What exactly was the rationale behind cutting a cable that connects the entire block? One resident demanded, his voice echoing off the sterile walls of the community center. I couldn't resist chiming in, "Karen, did you even check if that cable was crucial to our internet before you made your little snip?" The room erupted in murmurs of agreement and a few sarcastic claps. It was as if every resident was collectively saying, "We're tired of your entitled, uninformed decisions." Karen fumbled through her notes, her excuses growing increasingly nonsensical by the minute. She claimed it was an isolated incident, and that she just needed to enforce the rules. But as the evidence piled up, and with it, the undeniable reality of our now disconnected block, it became impossible for her to deflect the criticism. The heated debate quickly turned into a full-scale showdown between the residents and the HOA board, exposing long-standing communication gaps and a systemic failure to properly manage our community's infrastructure. As if the technical blunder wasn't enough, our investigation dug up some truly scandalous details that made the entire fiasco even juicier. It turned out that the installation and maintenance of our cable system were shrouded in secrecy from the very start. We uncovered a series of emails and internal documents suggesting that there had been under-the-table deals during the installation phase. Apparently, the contractor who set up our system had sweet-talked the HOA into bypassing certain safety protocols. Protocols that, if followed, would have clearly indicated the importance of that critical cable. One document in particular revealed a small bribe paid by the contractor to a mid-level HOA official, all in exchange for overlooking a crucial technical detail. This wasn't a conspiracy theory straight out of a Netflix drama, it was documented fact. It seemed that our entire cable network had been compromised from the start, not by a technical glitch, but by the insidious practice of cutting corners for profit. And of course, Karen, blissfully ignorant of these shady dealings, had made her fateful decision based solely on the limited, sanitized information provided by the very same officials who should have known better. This revelation sent shockwaves through the community. Suddenly, it wasn't just about a cable cut. It was about systemic corruption and a complete breakdown in communication. Our digital detectives were now more determined than ever to hold the HOA accountable. We demanded that a full audit be conducted on the entire cable installation and maintenance process. We wanted to know who else was involved in these underhanded deals, and how many other vital components of our community's infrastructure were being jeopardized by similar mismanagement. The confrontation didn't end with a few angry words and a dismissive apology from Karen. Oh no, it spiraled into a full-blown public relations nightmare for the HOA. Posts on social media and community forums became a torrent of memes, sarcastic one-liners, and heated debates about accountability. Every time Karen attempted to make an official statement, someone would immediately call her out, demanding clarity and transparency. One of the most viral posts, shared thousands of times on our community's Facebook group, read, When you cut the cable that runs the whole block, you're not enforcing rules, you're enforcing chaos. The post perfectly encapsulated the mood of our residents, who felt betrayed not only by a misguided decision, but by an entire system that allowed such negligence to occur. With mounting pressure, the HOA board was forced to issue a temporary truce. They promised to launch an independent review of the cable system and the decisions leading up to the blackout. But for many, this was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and trust had been shattered. The incident became a rallying point for a broader movement demanding reform within the HOA, calling for more inclusive decision-making processes, greater technical oversight, and an end to the opaque, backroom deals that had plagued our community for years. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, it's hard not to see it as a classic example of entitlement meeting incompetence. Here we had a self-appointed guardian of order, Karen, who, without so much as a proper briefing on the technical intricacies of our cable system, made a decision that plunged an entire block into darkness. And when challenged, her excuses were as flimsy as the poorly documented protocols that led to this disaster. This episode has left a lasting mark on our community. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-centralized power and the need for transparency and accountability in systems that affect everyone's daily lives. No one should have the authority to make unilateral decisions that impact the connectivity and functionality of an entire neighborhood. And while Karen may have thought she was enforcing a rule, in reality, she was enforcing her own sense of superiority, one that ultimately backfired spectacularly. In the aftermath, as our community continues to rebuild its digital infrastructure and mend the rift between residents and the HOA, one thing is crystal clear. We will never again allow a single misguided decision to undermine our collective well-being. The lessons we've learned from this debacle are now etched into our shared memory, a reminder that when entitlement goes unchecked, chaos isn't far behind. After the chaos of the cable cut, our block was plunged into a state of utter digital darkness. But instead of wallowing in frustration or binge-posting memes about our dearly departed Wi-Fi, we rallied together. Neighbors who'd never exchanged more than a polite hello at the mailboxes suddenly found themselves united by a common enemy. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of HOA nonsense. It all started with impromptu fix-it meetings in living rooms and driveways. We quickly realized that if we wanted to restore our internet and our sanity, we had to act fast. The first step was creating an emergency communication network. With one neighbor's mobile hotspot and another's willingness to share their overachieving 5G plan, we set up a temporary mesh network. Suddenly, we were back online, albeit with some quirky neighborhood Wi-Fi, names like Karen Sucks _4G and HOA Revenge. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We organized ourselves on community forums, WhatsApp groups, and even old-fashioned phone trees. Yes, phone trees made a comeback. Every post was a mix of righteous indignation and practical advice. Don't trust any single signal, spread your risk, became the unofficial motto. This grassroots response wasn't just about fixing a technical glitch, it was a statement. We weren't going to let one entitled decision dismantle our way of life. And let me tell you, there was a serious collective, I told you so vibe in the air. After the chaos of the cable cut, our block was plunged into a state of utter digital darkness. But instead of wallowing in frustration or binge-posting memes about our dearly departed Wi-Fi, we rallied together. Neighbors who'd never exchanged more than a polite hello at the mailboxes suddenly found themselves united by a common enemy. Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of HOA nonsense. It all started with impromptu fix-it meetings in living rooms and driveways. We quickly realized that if we wanted to restore our internet and our sanity, we had to act fast. The first step was creating an emergency communication network. With one neighbor's mobile hotspot and another's willingness to share their overachieving 5G plan, we set up a temporary mesh network. Suddenly, we were back online, albeit with some quirky neighborhood Wi-Fi, names like Karen Sucks _4G and HOA Revenge. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We organized ourselves on community forums, WhatsApp groups, and even old-fashioned phone trees. Yes, phone trees made a comeback. Every post was a mix of righteous indignation and practical advice. "Don't trust any single signal, spread your risk," became the unofficial motto. This grassroots response wasn't just about fixing a technical glitch, it was a statement. We weren't going to let one entitled decision dismantle our way of life. And let me tell you, there was a serious collective, "I told you so" vibe in the air. Next came the showdown with the HOA. With evidence in hand and a community thirsting for answers, we demanded that the HOA board, and Karen in particular, face up to the consequences of their poorly thought-out actions. The next HOA meeting, which was hyped up more than a season finale of our favorite reality TV show, turned into a battleground of truth versus authority. When Karen took the stage, she was met with a barrage of pointed questions and sarcastic quips. "Karen, did you even check what that cable was doing before you decided to enforce the rules?" shouted one resident. Another post on the forum summed it up perfectly. "If your solution to tech problems is cutting the cord, maybe you should stick to knitting." The meeting quickly escalated from a simple Q&A to a full-blown demand for accountability. Every claim she made was challenged with hard evidence from our digital detectives team. The internal documents, the technical manuals, even that retired technician's damning account of the shady deals during installation. It all came crashing down on her like a tidal wave of common sense. Karen's usual excuses didn't fly this time. Her insistence that she was just enforcing community standards sounded hollow amid the collective anger of residents. The board, now under intense public scrutiny, had no choice but to admit that a critical oversight had occurred, and that oversight was not just a minor blip, but a systemic failure of the very process meant to safeguard our community. With the immediate crisis momentarily averted by our impromptu network, the focus shifted to long-term solutions. It was time to rebuild not only the physical network, but also the trust that had been shattered by Karen's unilateral decision. A series of community hackathons were organized, meetings where anyone with technical know-how was invited to review and suggest improvements for our cable infrastructure. These gatherings, often held in local coffee shops and even backyards, were equal parts technical workshop and town hall meeting. Ideas flew as freely as the coffee, with proposals ranging from creating a redundant backup system to installing smart switches that would require multiple approvals before any changes were made. The impact of these meetings was twofold. First, they re-empowered residents by giving us a voice in the technical decisions that affected our daily lives. Second, they exposed just how out of touch the old guard had become. Many of us discovered that the so-called expertise of the HOA board was nothing more than a thin veneer over years of complacency and, frankly, entitlement. One resident posted, "Who knew that a single cable could be so important? Apparently, only those of us who actually read the fine print." Meanwhile, the HOA was forced into a corner. Under the relentless pressure from the community, and a few very pointed posts on Reddit and Facebook, they agreed to bring in an independent technical auditor to review the entire cable system and the decision-making process behind its management. This audit was not just a formality. It was a clear message that no one was above scrutiny. The auditor's report, when it finally came out, confirmed what we all suspected. The cable cut was the result of gross mismanagement and a complete lack of understanding of the system's complexity. The fallout from the incident led to sweeping reforms in our community management. The HOA board was restructured, and for the first time, positions were filled through open, democratic elections rather than backroom appointments. New policies were put in place that required any major decision regarding community infrastructure to undergo rigorous technical review and to be approved by a majority of residents. In other words, no more unilateral Karen decisions were allowed. These changes sparked a newfound sense of empowerment. Residents who had previously felt marginalized by the HOA suddenly found their voices were being heard. Community communication channels were overhauled to ensure transparency, and regular tech briefings became a part of the monthly agenda. The idea was simple. If we're all going to be affected by these decisions, we should all be part of the conversation. One of the most popular changes was the establishment of a resident tech committee, composed of volunteers from our community. This committee was tasked with overseeing any future modifications to our digital infrastructure, ensuring that any technical changes were thoroughly vetted and communicated to all residents. It was a win-win. The HOA got some much-needed technical guidance, and we got a say in how our community was managed. Looking back, the entire debacle was a powerful lesson in the importance of transparency, technical literacy, and community accountability. It taught us that in a world increasingly dependent on technology, the consequences of an uninformed decision can ripple out in ways that affect every single resident. And while Karen's actions were undeniably disastrous, they inadvertently served as a catalyst for change, a wake-up call that no one in our community would ever take connectivity for granted again. For me, and for many of us, this experience underscored a simple but profound truth. No one has the right to make decisions that impact an entire community without first understanding the full picture. Entitlement and a lack of technical insight don't mix, and when they do, chaos is almost guaranteed. As our community continues to heal and rebuild, the scars of that dark day serve as a constant reminder of what can happen when authority is wielded without accountability. The digital blackout was more than just an inconvenience. It was a moment of reckoning. It forced us to reevaluate our systems, our processes, and most importantly, the power dynamics within our neighborhood. Now, as we enjoy our restored and even improved connectivity, we do so with a renewed sense of vigilance. We know that our community is only as strong as the systems that support it, and we are committed to ensuring that no single individual can ever again pull the proverbial plug without facing the full force of collective scrutiny. In the end, the ordeal wasn't just about a cable being cut. It was about reclaiming our right to be involved in decisions that affect our lives. It was about saying, enough is enough, to outdated, opaque management practices. And while Karen might still insist she was just enforcing the rules, we all know that real order comes not from unilateral actions but from open dialogue, mutual respect, and a genuine commitment to the common good. So here's to a future where every cable, every connection, and every decision is made with transparency, accountability, and the full input of the community. Because in our block, we're not just residents. We're a community that refuses to be left in the dark again.